to a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country of where this podcast is recorded. We acknowledge their continuing connection to the land and waters, and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
Hope Book Club with Georgia Free. Because life's just better with a book.
Today, I am thrilled to have Gyan Yankovich on the podcast. Gyan is a writer and editor based here in Sydney. She's currently the lifestyle editor at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, but she's also just released her debut book, Just Friends, which I absolutely loved. It explores modern friendship, what it means to be, to make, and to sometimes lose a friend. Gyan, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Talk me through the importance of friends in your life. Obviously, they are a high priority if you've written an entire novel about your friends. But take me back perhaps to growing up. Did you make friends easily? What was the situation like for you?
I mean, I think that I have always been really lucky in that ever since I was a kid, I've had some really special close friendships. You know, obviously some who didn't stick around, you know, that kind of played a really pivotal role in either primary school or high school, or, you know, even in the years after that, they were kind of really close to me for a few years and then we, you know, drifted apart. But I've had some friends as well, which I know I'm so exceptionally lucky to be able to say that I've had friends since, you know, those early primary school years through high school, and that we're still really close now. So it's always been something that I've been aware of, you know, that friends mean a lot to me and they're really special and they're definitely worth investing in. But I probably didn't realize just how much so until I started working on the book and kind of really started to dig into why I felt like that for so long.
Yeah. Can you kind of go into some of those insights that I guess that you found through writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so many. It's hard to know where to start. I think that one of the things that really stood out to me when writing the book, not only looking at research that speaks to the health benefits of friendship and also, you know, interviewing case studies who talked about their friendships that were so different to my own, but one of the things that really stood with me was the benefits of considering our friendships when we look to the future. I think that so often friendship is tied up in memories when we look back at a certain time period of our life and we think about how lucky it was to have someone by our side on a holiday or through, you know, a particularly hard breakup or in a job or something like that. But what I realized that we don't do so much, and that what I've been trying to do since writing the book is, you know, when you think of the future, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ahead, you know, where are you seeing your friends in that time? You know, who do you hope is still there? What are you hoping those relationships are like? And, you know, once you've kind of figured that out, what are those things that you can do now to make sure that that's the case in the future?
Yeah, that's so important. And I do want to talk about that intentionality of prioritizing your friendships in really practical ways. I think, you know, especially in your kind of 20s and 30s, that transitional period where everyone is off doing their own thing. You know, maybe they're still studying, maybe they're working, maybe they have kids, maybe they don't. They're overseas, friends move away. It's such a kind of period of flux that it can be really easy to just be like, you know, put the friendship at, you know, the bottom of a checklist somewhere. For you, because I know that you also were based in New York for quite a while, how did you kind of make your friends a priority during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I love talking about those decades that you've listed because they are these really interesting times for friendship where, you know, I think especially in our 20s, we do have a lot more time for friendships. And oftentimes that can be because we're living in a share house or we're at uni. So you're still seeing friends in class and in lectures every day. And, you know, you've got that spare time to kind of just hang out with people. And that obviously does change for a lot of people in their 30s, where you might make friends at work or you might make friends, you know, in a mother's group or through parenting or someone in your neighborhood. But it is very circumstantial. And I think the tricky time in those periods, and similarly, this was definitely my experience when I moved overseas, is that all of a sudden you kind of have to confront at a certain point that you might be doing something different to a friend. So, you know, a friend that you did make in uni, all of a sudden you're not at uni anymore and you're both working, or someone moves, or one person has a baby and the other person doesn't, or someone's in a long-term relationship while the other person's still single. And all of these little dynamic changes can really affect friendships. And that's where I think that idea of being really intentional about who we want to hold on to and who we want still around in the future really comes into play. So for me, when I moved to New York, it was this really interesting point for my friendships, because on the one hand, I still had all these really close people that were still living in Australia that I didn't want to sacrifice my friendships with them at all. So a big part of that time was making sure that I was, keeping in touch with them to the best of my ability within the time zones, which is a lot easier said than done. And it's something that I've definitely struggled with since moving back to Australia and, thinking I've got all these new friends in New York. How do I continue that going? And it's definitely not easy. So during that time, I was like, I've got my, oldest, bestest friends in Australia. I don't want to lose that closeness at all. But also I need to be thinking about meeting new people in this new country where I'm trying to set up this life, and where I ended up living for a little over 3 years. So it was definitely a balancing act of, particularly with the time difference, sometimes Friday and Saturday nights were the best time in New York to catch up with a friend at home, do that long phone call or that FaceTime you've been looking forward to all week. But then sometimes, that's also when the new friend wants to go out to dinner or get a movie or go get a drink, and you really have to battle with what is the priority this week and, what's going to help me at the moment, and what can I shuffle and shift so that everyone feels like they're getting attention, but also that I'm not isolating myself in this new country by not putting myself out there and meeting new people. It's tricky.
Yeah, it's so, so important. I'd love for you to talk a little about loneliness as well. You go into this right at the start of the book, how you were in lockdown in New York for months and you didn't see anyone besides your partner. How did you combat loneliness, and how were your friends able, or maybe even not able, to help during that time? Because even the experience of lockdown in New York between here and Sydney was so, so different.
It was really different. And I think that, we all, or many of us, had that experience where it was, we were all in lockdown, isolated, and trying our best to fill those gaps. So for some people, it was, sending a lot of voice memos or doing, Zoom happy hours, like all that stuff that I think eventually after a few months, everyone was like, wait, this is actually really draining. And maybe isn't this, societal safety that I thought it was. But for me during that time, the big realization that I had about friendship in those moments, which I do write about in the book, was how much I missed my more casual friends. And, I was in a habit of talking to my friends over the phone and online and over social media, my friends in Australia, because I wasn't in a place where I could physically see them. So for me, that change between, COVID times and non-COVID times wasn't really that obvious, besides the fact that all of a sudden, everyone was home a lot more and available. So I wanted to chat more. But I really longed for those friends that I would run into at a friend's birthday, or, my friends in the office who I wouldn't necessarily have hung out with on the weekend, but I would maybe get lunch with a few times a week, or the people that I, would buy coffee off in the morning, the people that I might go to the movies with every 3 weeks, but aren't someone that I would necessarily call on the phone. And it made me realize that oftentimes it is actually those smaller, weaker, more casual friendships that are what make us feel less lonely day to day, which wasn't something that I had heard spoken about that much at that point.
That's such an interesting point. So, so true. I would love for you to talk also about how to make friends as an adult that's not a situational friendship, because as kids, it's kind of like the formula is you go to school, you go to sports, you have all these situational friends, and then you go to uni and it's the same. And then you hit adult life, and apart from maybe work friends or, as you mentioned, like parenting groups, things like that, you actually kind of have to put yourself out there to make new friends if you want to kind of, create new relationships that aren't based, on a years old friendship. How did you navigate that, especially moving to New York, pretty much having to start your social life afresh?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, how to make friends is like the $1 million question that I think every single adult, no matter how many friends they have, still really struggles with. I haven't, in all of my research and work on friendship, met anyone that's like, yeah, that comes so easy to me. Like, I'm making a new friend every day. That's just not how things happen in this world. I think that, for me, I noticed a big difference between Sydney. I'm not from Sydney. I moved to Sydney when I was 19. I grew up in regional New South Wales. The difference between moving to Sydney and trying to make friends and the difference between moving to New York and make friends was really obvious. And I think that New York in itself is a really special city that is really accommodating of newcomers. People want to go out all the time. People are very outgoing. These are obviously sweeping generalizations, but I found that the city was really accommodating. A lot of people who live there didn't grow up there. So I think that people are really familiar with that experience of coming and not really knowing anyone and hoping that you'll get invited to something and meet some new people. So it was an interesting place to go through all of that, but it really made me realize how important it is to put yourself out there, whether you are in a city like New York where it is easier, or you're somewhere like Sydney, which in my experience is a lot clickier and a lot of, is a lot of people who grew up here and who are still friends with people from school and uni, and they're kind of like their core groups. But it really taught me about the benefit of like, if you meet someone and you like them, then for them to eventually ever become your friend, like at some point you're going to have to tell them that you want to hang out, or ask for their number, or suggest that you do something again, or, make it known that you think that they're interesting and cool and someone that you'd want in your life, which sounds so much easier said than done. And it can be really awkward, and it's a really vulnerable position to put yourself in. But I think that whether you're talking about making friends at work or in some kind of, hobby space or a sports team, like there has to be that intention there and that confidence or that ability to move past that point of this is going to be awkward, but if I want to see this person again, or I want a relationship outside this very circumstantial place that we find ourselves in, I'm going to have to put myself out there.
Let's talk about the hard part of friendships, which is navigating conflict. I feel like we're taught to navigate conflict with our families and even in workspaces, and that's all very well and good. But friend fights, oh my goodness, they can be the most uncomfortable things ever. How do you navigate conflict with your friends?
It's so interesting, and I love talking about this because one of the most interesting pieces of research I came across when I was working on my book was to do with how we approach conflict and friendship. And it basically found that when it comes to romantic relationships, we are more likely to take an active response to a conflict with our partner. So that might be a really positively active response, which is like, let's sit down and talk it out until we come to a resolution. Or it might be a negatively active response, which is like, let's get in a massive fight about this and, storm off and slam the door. But with friendships, we're so much more likely to approach things with a really passive response. So in a good way, that could be like just waiting things till things blow over, not bringing it up. Or in negatively passive response is basically like, I'm not going to talk to this person about it again. I'm going to end the friendship. I'm not going to bring it up. I'm basically going to ghost them and drift away. And it was interesting to me because I have always thought that I'm someone who's just like very, not into conflict averse. Like that's why I don't get in fights with my friends. But then I thought about my partner and, not to say that we're in arguments all the time at all, but, things do come up where it's like we have disagreements that are very healthy and we talk through them and we move past it and we're stronger for it. And that kind of made me realize if I'm able to have, conflicts and constructive conversations with my partner, because things do happen, why aren't they happening with my friendships, especially ones who I'm so close with? Is it, I didn't believe for a second that it was because we have these perfect relationships where nothing has ever annoyed me or I haven't annoyed them in any way. I was like, no, it's because I'm being passive and I'm just kind of happily annoying things. And kind of what am I missing out by not ever bringing up things, and what extra closeness could be found if we did sometimes talk through those conflicts. So it's something that I've been trying to work on. Not to say that I've been, trying to like start fights with my friends, but I think that, a lot of the time conflict can just start from being a little bit more honest with our friends. And when I say conflict, I think I mean that's probably not the right word, because I mean it in a more positive way as well, in that, if someone asks you your opinion on something and you think, oh, they could probably benefit from hearing the truth about this, then sometimes you just have to say it. And it might end up, turning into something that we would call a conflict. But at the end of the day, you've also let your friend know, look, if you ask for my honest opinion and I, have a thought that I think would benefit you in the long run or benefit a situation that you found yourself in, like you can trust me to tell you it. So since the book came out, I haven't really found myself in any situations where I've had to exercise that as of yet. But I am hoping that through this writing and this research and the thinking that I've done around this, that I will be a little bit different in how I approach things. Because I think, obviously sometimes, not everything calls for the really honest discussion. Sometimes it is just best to let things go. But it's nice to not feel like you're letting things go because you can't do anything else about it.
Yeah, I like that. Let's talk about friendship breakups, which in my experience are the most painful, more than romantic breakups, more than fights with your family. Oh my goodness, because so often there just isn't closure. You have friends that drift away or something happens and you're never able to talk it out. How do you reconcile a friendship breakup within yourself when there isn't any closure, if it is that drifting away?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. And I think when I've written about friendship breakups in the past, what has been really interesting is what, the role that we think our friends play in our life. So often we see ourselves mirrored back in our friends. I think for that reason, when compared to a romantic relationship, it can be quite easy. I mean, it's not easy to accept, but it can be eventually easy to accept sometimes if there's been a breakup or you've been dating someone, you haven't heard from them. You're like, you know what? They just weren't my person. They're meant for someone else. I'm going to find someone who really, loves me for me and it's going to be okay in the long run. I think that we find that a lot easier to accept than a friend who, it's not a one-on-one relationship. People can have multiple friends. So I think the idea that someone doesn't want to be your friend anymore can be really, really hurtful and can really make us look at ourselves and kind of ask, why? Why doesn't this person like me? Does that mean that I am fundamentally unlikable in a way that I don't think we have necessarily with romantic relationships eventually? I know that in the moment, if someone breaks up with you, you definitely do have that feeling of like, it's because I'm unlovable, but it normally wears off when, you start seeing someone else or, you find someone who does feel like a better match for you and appreciates you. But with friendship, I think what is hard is that there isn't that replacement of a friend that you can have with romantic relationships. I was seeing you and now I'm seeing this person. It's not like if a friendship ends and you make a new friend after, you're like, well, that's healed. I have a new replacement friend. It gets a little bit trickier. And I think that is often why people carry this hurt around for years and years and years, because it's what it says about us. Why didn't this person who knew me so well and could have kept me in their life, they weren't looking to break up with me so they could replace me with someone else necessarily. Why didn't they stick around, or why couldn't we work it out? It's really, really complicated. And I also think the fact that we don't talk about friendship breakups nearly as much as we do any other kind of relationship breakdown means that we just don't have the toolkit to move past it or to process it or to feel like we can talk about it with other friends without feeling a little bit embarrassed or feeling like we're starting a conversation that might end with a friend thinking, oh, well, like maybe I want to end this friendship as well. Or, it's a real sensitivity around friendship and friendship breakups that I think make it so difficult to process and for that reason move on from.
What do you see as the way forward from that? How do we move forward collectively?
I think starting the conversation, and, I write about this in the book, like, we think about pop culture, whether it's music or books or movies or TV shows. So many of the storylines that we are absorbing from a young age are about heartbreak and overcoming it. And I think without that kind of those same reference points for friendship breakups, we're really out on our own. And I think that, we really underestimate how helpful it is to have all of those stories and solutions in the back of our minds to call back to when something happens to us. And when I was working on the friendship breakup chapter in particular, I was really surprised by how many people wanted to talk to me about their friend breakups. And I don't think it was because they necessarily were like, I want to be in the book. I think it was just that they were like, here's someone who wants to have this conversation with me. And there's this real hurt that I've been sitting on for all this time. And there's someone I feel like I can talk to about it without fear of judgment. And I think that if, more of us had more people in our lives that we felt like we could be really open and honest about what's happened in our friendships in the past, then it would be really cathartic, but also more of us would have more stories in the back of our minds. So then when it happens to us, it's like, oh, that reminds me actually of that friend that my friend told me about, that their friendship ended. Maybe I can talk to them, or I have a reference point, or at least know that you're not the only one who has gone through something like that.
That's so important. I know that we've already talked about so much of what's happened in the book, but I'd love to know where the idea actually stemmed from for you to actually write this book.
Yeah, so I, as you mentioned at the start of the episode, am a journalist. So I've been writing lifestyle content for about 14 years now, and I've always found myself come back to friendship just constantly. Even when I was in jobs, it was like very much not in the job description. I'd be like, oh, what if I also wrote this story on the weekend that's about friends or friendships or, my friends or something that's happened to them or something I've been thinking about. So I kind of found myself at this point where I had some time between jobs and I was like, I was feeling really burnt out from full-time work. And I was like, I would love to work on a bigger project. Maybe it's the time, I think that, as you've probably heard, from so many people, I feel like every writer and a lot of people who aren't writers actually, like, I've really got a book in me. That's something I'd like to do one day. So I think that it was this real, perfect moment in time where I had this topic that I was obsessed with writing about. I knew that I liked writing about friendship more than anything else. I had the time to do it. And I'd also just moved back to Australia. It was a few years after the start of the pandemic. And, as we've spoken about, that time really set off a lot of thoughts and a lot of rethinking about friendship and the people who mean the most to me and the influence they have over our lives. So it was kind of this just moment where all of those things came together and I was like, oh, wait, this is what I should be doing now. This is what I want to be doing. And I think once that thinking started and I started getting words on paper and thinking about chapters and topics and people I'd want to speak to, I was like, oh, no, wait, this is all I want to be doing. Anything else at this point would just be like so in second place. This book matters so much to me now before it even existed. So I was really lucky in that it was like, this perfect collision of moment and timing.
And it sounds like the transition was a really, really positive one. But I can imagine it was so different. You used to short articles and deadlines and all of a sudden you're writing this novel, which is, months and months long. How did you find that transition from journalist to author?
In some ways, I think that I'm really lucky because I knew that I could do it. I had written stories before. I knew how to find experts and case studies and, get the quotes from all these groups of people onto the page with my own thoughts and make some kind of coherent argument. What I didn't know how to do was like handle a 12-month deadline. I'm normally used to working on like a 2-week deadline or even less, turning things around really quickly. It's really hard to work out what to start with and what to do by when you have, you're kind of facing 12 months. I'm a huge procrastinator as well. So I was like, today I'm going to do my errands. And then tomorrow I'll start the book. There was a lot of that, a lot of putting off starting the book. But I kind of just had to break it down into smaller projects. So, obviously chapter by chapter, each chapter I had an idea I wanted to work through. I had things I wanted to read, things I wanted to listen to, people I wanted to contact and talk to and interview. So once I had that kind of mapped out, then I could kind of see it as, I guess, mini articles, just going back to what I do know as a journalist. It is a really different beast. And I think that one of the things that I thought was really important when it comes to nonfiction is, picking up a book and making sure that it had a really clear through line. I didn't want it to pick up a book and feel like 10 separate articles. I wanted it to feel like something that really fit together and that you kind of could have read the chapters in, as one piece of work, like that they did stand alone, but also that they felt part of a book. And I wanted the book to have its own tone and feeling as a whole entity. So that's something that you kind of have to keep in mind as well and make sure that you're getting the work done by separating it all out, but you're not separating it too much out so that it doesn't go together and it's going to feel weird when someone reads it from start to finish.
Yeah, no, for sure. You've done such a fantastic job. It's definitely a coherent novel for sure. What do you hope people take away when they read the book?
I think that there's so much of society and culture that is set up to make us deprioritize friendship, especially behind our, relationships that we have with our family and with our romantic partners. And I think that something that I wanted to be really careful with when writing the book was to not ask people to deprioritize their relationships with family and their partners or children, because those relationships are so important. My own relationships in my life with my family and my partner are so important, and I definitely, cherish and value them. But I think it was more the idea of bringing friends up to that same level rather than reshuffling, just being like, friends also matter that much as well. And if you can spread yourself between family and romantic partners, like, why not also try and carve out some time for friends? Because you don't know when the friends are going to be the people who are there for you when the other groups can't. So I think that that's one thing. And then I also think, back to what we were speaking to, it's just that intention and effort that has to go into a friendship to make it really meaningful and really long lasting. I think that we can think of friendship as something that should be fun and easy and just flow. And it is the case most of the time if you're lucky, but it's definitely not always the case. And if you go into a friendship thinking that it will always be the case, you're going to lose that friendship eventually because some kind of hurdle or stumble is going to happen. And if you're not prepared for that and prepared to put the effort in after those things, it's really easy to lose people.
Gyan Yankovich, it has been a pleasure having you on Finding Hope. Go and read Just Friends. It is out now wherever you get your books. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice.
You can follow Gyan on social media. She's on Instagram at Gyan Yankovich. That is Gyan Yankovich. And check out her website for more of her work at gyanyankovich.com. And as always, that information is in the show notes. And as mentioned at the start of the episode, you can join us over on Facebook for more book chats. You can just search for the Hope Book Club. And we'd also love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. So if you want to send this episode to one of your friends that you think needs to hear it about the wonder and beauty of friends, I'd love that. You can also rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Until then, stay reading. Here is a quote for your week. There are 3 things that grow more precious with age: old wood to burn, old books to read, and old friends to enjoy. That one's from Henry Ford. Catch you next time.